I never thought I'd be the kind of man whispered about at his own granddaughter's graduation. But that morning, as I stood in front of my old mirror, adjusting the knot of a tie that had seen better days, I had a strange feeling deep in my chest. It was the same tie I wore when my son Gregory graduated from high school nearly 40 years ago. Back then, my wife Margaret stood beside me, her hand resting on my arm, her smile brighter than any tie could ever be. She's been gone a long while now, and mornings like this remind me how heavy silence can feel in a house built for two. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I leaned closer to the mirror. My hair, once thick and dark, had turned a pale shade of silver. My cheeks carried the map of years, creases carved by late shifts at the post office. Nights worrying over bills and days spent in sun and snow, raising a family with whatever strength I could muster. I smoothed my jacket. It still fit, though a little tighter in the shoulders. I told myself it was because the jacket had shrunk in the closet, but I knew better. On the kitchen table lay a simple breakfast toast. Black coffee in a chipped mug, and a small orange I had picked up at the diner yesterday when I joined a couple of old friends. But next to it sat something that made my heart beat differently. A thick envelope sealed and tucked inside my jacket pocket now. I'd been carrying it for weeks. No one in my family knew what was inside, and I wasn't sure if today was the right day for it to finally see the light. Still, I kept it close, like a secret companion. The walk to the car was slow. My knees complained, the way they always did when the weather shifted, and the cane that once belonged to my father tapped against the concrete. I slid behind the wheel of my rusty old Ford pickup, the one with more miles on it than I'd like to admit. She coughed to life after 2 turns of the key, and I patted the dashboard. "Come on, girl. Just get me to Lily's big day," I muttered. Maplewood High wasn't far, 5 or maybe 10 minutes if the traffic lights were kind. Driving down Main Street, I passed the familiar sights of my little town. The corner diner with its neon sign flickering, the hardware store where I once spent Saturday mornings fixing everything Margaret thought needed fixing, and the small white church with a notice board out front that read, "Congratulations, Class of 20." 25, I nodded to it as if the wooden sign could nod back. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, families were already streaming inside. Mothers with cameras slung around their necks, fathers in pressed shirts, shaking hands with neighbors, kids in bright gowns huddled together, their laughter spilling into the spring air. I sat for a moment watching. Pride swelled in my chest, not just for Lily, though she was my heart, but for all of them. These kids didn't know it yet, but this day would be burned into their memories for the rest of their lives. I reached into my pocket and touched the envelope again. My fingers lingered on it, as if it held more than just paper, like it held pieces of my very soul. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the buzz of celebration. Inside, the gym was transformed. Balloons in blue and gold, the school colors, floated near the rafters. Folding chairs filled the floor, row after row, leaving only a narrow aisle down the center. On the stage, a long table draped with a navy cloth held a stack of diplomas. A banner stretched across the back wall. "Congratulations, Maplewood. Graduates." The high school band was tuning up, the sound of trumpets and clarinets echoing. I found my way toward the front rows, searching for the familiar faces of Gregory and Monica. I spotted them, my son in a gray suit, his wife beside him, perfectly put together in a floral dress. And there, just behind them, Lily in her cap and gown, sitting with her classmates. My heart lifted at the sight of her. She was beaming her eyes, scanning the crowd, probably hoping to spot me. I raised my hand slightly, though I doubted she saw. As I slid into the seat at the end of the row, my body relaxed for the first time that morning. I thought, this is where I belong. Right here, close enough to see Lily walk across that stage. But in that moment, before I could even settle my cane against the chair, Monica leaned toward me. Her voice was low, sharp enough to cut through the band's noise. "Harold," she said, her smile frozen for the benefit of those around us, "maybe you should sit further back. Nobody really wants to see you here in the front row." Her words struck harder than any blow I've taken in my life. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard her. Maybe Monica's voice had tangled with the echoes of the band. But when I turned to look at her, that polite, painted smile never wavered, though her eyes were cold as stone. Gregory shifted in his seat. He didn't meet my gaze. Instead, he leaned slightly toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, maybe it's better if you sit farther back. Let's not make this awkward." Awkward. That was his word. As if my presence at my own granddaughter's graduation was the problem, not the disdain dripping from his wife's tongue. A heat rose in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Years of working the mail routes had taught me patience. You learn to keep moving no matter the weather, no matter the weight on your shoulders. So I nodded once, slow and heavy, and pressed my hand against the cane beside me. The air in that gym felt heavy the moment Monica's words settled between us. My heart thudded like a drum against my ribs, not from anger, but from something colder, something hollow. For a split second, I tried to steady my face to keep the hurt from showing. Old habits. When you spend a lifetime swallowing pride, you learn how to wear a mask. But masks don't fool eyes that want to laugh. I heard the chuckles. A pair of teenage boys snickered 2 rows behind me. A woman whispered to her husband, her voice sharp enough to cut. Imagine being told to move back by your own family. My ears burned. My fingers curled tighter around the handle of my cane. I forced a smile, thin and brittle, like glass about to crack. It didn't reach my eyes. Inside, I was unraveling. It's a strange kind of pain to realize you are no longer wanted by the very people you worked your hands raw for. Margaret and I used to dream about this stage of life, grandkids, family dinners, holidays filled with laughter. But sitting there, I felt like a stranger trespassing at a party meant for everyone else. Slowly, I pressed my palms against my knees and rose. The cane wobbled as I gripped it, the rubber tip squeaking against the polished floor. That sound was louder than it should have been, drawing more attention than I wished. Heads turned. Some looked puzzled, others embarrassed for me, and a few, God help me, looked amused. I fixed my gaze on the aisle, refusing to meet their eyes. My legs carried me forward, stiff and unsteady, but I kept moving. Each step echoed in my chest, a reminder of how far I had fallen in my own family's eyes. From the corner of my vision, I thought I saw Lily searching the rows again, her cap tilting, her smile fading, as if she couldn't quite find what she was looking for. I prayed she didn't see me retreating. Let her memory of this day be joy, not shame. By the time I reached the back rows, my breath felt shallow. A mother with a young boy caught my eye. She tugged her child closer and offered me her seat with a gentle nod. "Here, sir," she said, voice kind, almost protective. I murmured thanks and lowered myself carefully, cane resting across my lap. From there, the stage looked distant, blurred by rows of heads and shoulders. My chest tightened, but I straightened my back. No one could take away the fact that Lily was my granddaughter. Even from the back row, I would be here for her. From the back row, the ceremony carried on as if nothing had happened. The principal spoke about achievement and community, his voice echoing off the gym walls. Parents clapped politely, snapping pictures, waving to their kids. I clapped too, though my hands felt like stone. Every cheer, every burst of applause felt distant. I wasn't part of it anymore, not in the way I had imagined. I was just a shadow on the edge of the celebration. My mind kept drifting. I remembered standing in this same gym decades ago when Gregory was the one in a cap and gown. I'd worked a double shift at the post office that day, my feet swollen inside my shoes, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Margaret had packed sandwiches, and we'd sat in this very spot afterward, laughing with neighbors, proud beyond words. Back then, I thought the bond between father and son was unshakable. How naive that feels now. A murmur rippled through the back rows, pulling me back to the present. 2 men in work boots were talking just loud enough for me to hear. "Isn't that old man Whitman?" one asked. "Yeah," the other said. "Raised his kid alone, didn't he?" "Surprised he's not up front with family," the first man shrugged. "Guess not everyone values what they've been given." Their words stung not because they were cruel, but because they rang with a truth I couldn't deny. I shifted in my seat, gripping the cane tighter. My knuckles turned pale. It was a strange thing sitting so close to strangers who respected me more than my own blood did. Then the band struck up again, the graduates preparing for the procession. A wave of excitement rolled through the gym families, leaning forward, cameras flashing. My heart ached with both pride and sorrow. Pride for Lily, who deserved every ounce of joy this day could bring. Sorrow for myself, for the hollow space that had opened between me and my son. I looked toward the stage, but from back here, Lily was only a blur in a sea of caps and gowns. Still, I knew she was there, her smile lighting up the moment. That was enough. Inside my jacket, the envelope pressed against my chest. A quiet reminder. A secret waiting for its time. I told myself to be patient. This wasn't the moment. But soon, very soon, the truth inside that envelope would speak louder than any whisper, louder than any insult. I sat straighter, drawing a long breath, letting the weight of the moment settle into my bones. I may have been pushed aside, humiliated in front of hundreds, but I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The ceremony moved forward with the rhythm of tradition, each graduate's name called out and greeted with cheers. From my seat at the back, the gym seemed like a stage play performed behind glass full of color and sound, yet I stood apart watching from a distance I hadn't chosen. When Lily's row finally rose to make their way toward the stage, my chest tightened. She was easy to spot, her blonde hair catching the gym lights even beneath the square cap. She laughed with the girl beside her, but her eyes kept drifting toward the crowd, scanning, searching. I knew what she was looking for. I also knew she wouldn't find me where she expected. As her group climbed the steps, the applause swelled. Gregory leaned forward in his seat, Monica, too, smiling wider, now the picture of proud parents, or rather proud guardians of the moment. They wanted the world to see them as the family center, the ones who belonged in the front row, bathed in recognition. But whispers have a way of cutting through even the loudest applause. They started soft just behind me at first. "Isn't that Harold Whitman?" a woman murmured. "Yes," came the reply. "Didn't he work the post office routes for decades? Rain or shine, he was out there." Another voice joined in, lower but no less pointed. "So why is he back here and not up front with his family?" I shifted in my seat. I hadn't planned to draw attention, not after the sting of earlier. But people notice absence just as sharply as presence. They noticed the empty space where a grandfather should be sitting proudly, and they noticed me tucked into the back, shoulders hunched, as though I'd been invited last minute. On stage, Lily's name was called. She crossed to the principal, shook his hand, accepted the diploma folder with that same bright smile I'd memorized since the day she was born. My throat tightened, pride welling up despite everything. She glanced out into the crowd again, her eyes flickering past the front rows, searching deeper. For one split second, I could have sworn her gaze landed on me. The applause filled the gym once more, but the whispers didn't stop. A man near the aisle leaned closer to his wife. "I heard Harold donated to the church for years, helped with the Veterans Fund, too." The wife's response was a frown. "Then what's he doing sitting back here like an outsider?" Their words were not meant to comfort me, but they did. Because in that moment I wasn't crazy for feeling wronged. Others saw it too. Others recognized the cruelty even if they didn't know the full story. Gregory and Monica kept their smiles fixed, even posed for a quick photo when someone raised a phone. Their laughter rang hollow, stretched thin like plastic wrap over something spoiled. The neighbors beside them nodded politely, but I caught the sideways glances. They knew. People always know more than they say. I leaned on my cane, steadying myself, the envelope pressed against my chest like a heartbeat. Not yet, I told myself. The time wasn't now. But the tide was turning ever so slightly. You could feel it in the way conversation shifted, the way eyes followed me as much as they followed the stage. The principal called for another round of applause for the graduating class. The gym shook with clapping cheers, the stomping of feet. But threaded through it all was a quieter rhythm, the murmur of recognition, of sympathy, of judgment, not directed at me, but at the ones who had pushed me aside. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe a little deeper. Humiliation still sat heavy on my shoulders, but it was no longer mine alone to carry. I stayed in that back row, watching the ceremony roll on, but the air in the gym was different now. The applause was still loud. The speeches still rolling one after another, yet beneath it all I felt a shift, subtle but certain, like a tide turning at sea. The neighbors near Gregory and Monica kept exchanging quiet looks. I caught sight of Mrs. Miller, no relation to me, just the woman who lived 2 doors down from them, whispering to her husband and then shaking her head with a tight frown. Their little gestures said more than words. People notice. They always do. I adjusted myself in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight. My cane slipped a little, and when I bent to grab it, I caught more fragments of whispers. Always thought Harold was a decent man, quiet type. Never asked for much. Sad, though. Look where he's sitting. Each remark was like a stone tossed into water, ripples spreading outward. My humiliation was no longer just mine. It had become visible, undeniable, and those ripples reached further than Gregory or Monica could control. From the stage, the school band launched into a medley, their notes tumbling across the gym. Parents clapped in rhythm, but even then I could see people leaning toward each other, whispering behind cupped hands. I wondered if Gregory heard any of it. He sat there with his shoulders tight clapping when the rest did his smile, never quite reaching his eyes. Monica, on the other hand, kept her face polished, the perfect mask. She touched her necklace now and then glanced at the neighbors as though gauging whether the performance was working. It wasn't. I leaned back, the envelope still firm against my chest. I thought of Margaret. She would have hated this charade, hated seeing me humiliated. But she also would have reminded me the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Folks can sense it the way they sense a storm rolling in, even before the sky darkens. On stage, the principal moved into the heart of his speech, talking about values, about legacy, about the shoulders every graduate stood on. His words carried weight, but in my ears they struck differently. Legacy. What did it mean when your own blood dismissed you like worn-out furniture? And yet, sitting here hearing my neighbors defend me with their murmurs, I realized legacy wasn't written by one or two voices. It was etched into the memory of a whole town. As Lily returned to her seat with her classmates, her diploma folder in hand, she glanced my way once more. Our eyes met just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. She saw me. She knew I was there. That small connection steadied me more than anything else could. The whispers grew as the ceremony neared its end. People began to piece things together without anyone spelling it out. They saw the proud smiles in the front row, the forced laughter, and they saw me alone at the back. And they judged. One man near the exit leaned toward his teenage son. "That old man worked for this community his whole life. You remember that boy? Respect is earned." His son nodded, eyes wide, and my throat tightened. By the time the final applause roared through the gym, I no longer felt invisible. Yes, I had been humiliated, pushed aside by my own family, but the crowd had spoken in its own quiet way, and their whispers carried more truth than Gregory's silence or Monica's sharp words ever could. I tapped my cane against the floor, slow and steady, as if to mark the beat of a new rhythm. The humiliation was still raw, but beneath it something else stirred resolve, waiting for its moment. The gym was buzzing, the kind of restless energy that comes when a long ceremony begins to wind down. Families shifted in their seats, programs crinkled in their hands, and graduates fidgeted with tassels, eager to toss them skyward. The air smelled faintly of popcorn from the concession stand and the wax of the polished floor. I was still in the back row, cane across my lap, shoulders stiff from holding myself upright. My humiliation hadn't faded, but the whispers from the crowd had softened the edges of it. They had noticed. That mattered more than I thought it would. The principal adjusted the microphone. His voice carried with a note of finality. Before we conclude this year's commencement, we have a very special announcement, one that honors not only our students, but the values of generosity and community that make Maplewood what it is. The murmurs quieted. Parents leaned in, kids straightened up. Even from where I sat, I could feel the shift, the anticipation of something unexpected. I knew what was coming. My heart began to thump against the envelope still pressed against my chest. This year's $50,000 Whitman Scholarship, the principal declared, pausing to let the figure sink in, goes to support the continued education of Maplewood students. A gasp rippled across the gym, followed by applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. $50,000 was no small sum in our town. Heads turned, whispers ignited again. The principal smiled, his hand resting on the podium. And this scholarship exists because of one man's quiet, steady commitment to our youth. A man who has supported this school year after year without asking for recognition. Please join me in thanking Mr. Harold Whitman. My name rang through the speakers, echoing off the walls. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. My throat went dry. I gripped the cane tighter, knuckles aching. The applause swelled, this time rolling like thunder. People craned their necks, searching. The local news camera station near the stage swung toward the back of the gym. Its red light blinked as it landed on me. I froze. For a moment I felt exposed, vulnerable like a deer caught in headlights. But then I heard voices rising above the clapping. That's him. Harold Whitman. He's right back there. I straightened, though my knees protested. My shoulders lifted, the weight of years and humiliation easing just enough to let me breathe. At the front, Gregory sat stiff, his mouth slightly open. His eyes darted from me to the principal as though searching for an explanation. Monica's face flushed crimson, her smile collapsing under the weight of disbelief. She gripped Gregory's arm, whispering something urgent, but he didn't move. The applause kept growing. People in the back row patted my shoulder, urged me forward. "Go on, Harold," someone said. "This is your moment." I rose slowly, leaning on the cane, each step deliberate. The gym seemed to expand around me, the rows of faces blurring into one sea of recognition. The principal extended his hand toward me, waiting. "Mr. Whitman," he said warmly, "on behalf of Maplewood High School, thank you." My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't shame. It was something closer to pride, tempered, hard-earned, but real. The walk from the back row to the stage felt longer than any mail route I ever carried. My cane tapped against the floor with each step, steady but deliberate, echoing louder than the applause itself in my ears. The camera followed me, the red light burning like a beacon, capturing every second for the evening news. As I made my way down the aisle, people leaned back to let me pass. Some reached out, patting my shoulder, nodding, murmuring words I couldn't quite catch over the roar of the crowd. My throat tightened. For years I had gone unseen, taken for granted by the very people closest to me. And now before the entire town my name was called, my work laid bare. By the time I reached the stage, my knees trembled, but I forced them to hold. The principal grasped my hand firmly, his other hand clapping against my shoulder. "Mr. Whitman," he said, his voice steady and clear for all to hear, "you've given more to this school than anyone ever realized. On behalf of every student you've helped, thank you." The applause swelled again, a wall of sound crashing around me. I looked out into the sea of faces. Lily was on her feet, clapping furiously, her eyes shining with tears. For a moment, the years of distance between us disappeared, and all I saw was my granddaughter proud of me. Then my gaze slid to the front row. Gregory sat stiff as a board, his hands motionless in his lap. Monica shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting left and right, as though searching for a way out of the spotlight. Their masks had cracked, and the shame was plain for all to see. The principal gestured toward the microphone. My heart pounded. Public speaking was never my strength. I was a mailman, not a politician, but this was no ordinary moment. I stepped forward, leaning on the cane, and let the silence settle. When I finally spoke, my voice came out rough but steady. I didn't give to this school for recognition, I began. I did it because this town raised me and it raised my family. I did it because kids deserve a chance even if their families are struggling. And I did it because my wife Margaret believed in education with all her heart. A hush fell across the gym. Even the restless graduates quieted, their caps and gowns stilling. I never thought my name would be on a scholarship, I continued, swallowing against the lump in my throat. I just wanted to make sure no student ever felt like doors were closed to them, because I know what closed doors feel like. I paused, letting the words hang. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Monica shift again, her jaw tightening. Gregory's face was pale, lips pressed together. "I've been humbled tonight," I said, finally scanning the crowd, letting my eyes linger on Lily. "But it's not humiliation I'll carry home. It's pride. Pride in every student here, pride in this community, and the reminder that respect, I let the word hang a moment longer, is earned, not demanded." The silence shattered into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet. The sound was overwhelming, a wave that threatened to sweep me off my feet. I stepped back, nodding to the principal, and carefully made my way down the steps. The cameraman caught every angle, the applause following me like a tide. Lily broke from her row, rushing down the aisle. She didn't care about the crowd or the cameras. She reached me halfway, throwing her arms around me. I nearly lost my balance, but held her close, my cane clattering softly against the floor. "I'm so proud of you, Grandpa," she whispered, her tears dampening my jacket. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. Behind us, the front row, sat frozen Gregory, stone still Monica, red face trapped under the weight of every pair of eyes in that gym. The tables had turned, and they knew it. The applause didn't fade. If anything, it swelled, filling every corner of that gymnasium until the rafters seemed to tremble. I stood there, cane in hand, my chest rising and falling, trying to hold steady against the tide of emotion. Dr. Samuel Brooks, the principal, raised his hand, asking for a moment of quiet. His voice carried with the calm authority of a man who had led this school for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we close, there is something you all deserve to know." The crowd hushed, leaning forward in their seats. I felt every pair of eyes on me. Dr. Brooks looked my way, then back at the microphone. Over 30 students have been able to attend college thanks to Mr. Whitman's generosity. Not once, not twice, but year after year, his support has opened doors that otherwise would have remained shut. Gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. A woman in the middle row clutched her chest, tears brimming in her eyes. Beside her, a man nodded slowly, his face heavy with recognition. I swallowed hard. I hadn't wanted this spotlight. For years, I'd written the checks, quietly asked only that the scholarship stay anonymous. But hearing the number out loud, over 30 lives, touched it, struck me differently. Those weren't just figures on paper. Those were children who had carried my hope into the future. A voice rose from the back, breaking the stillness. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman." It came from a young man in his 20s, cap pulled, low eyes shining. Others joined in, their voices layering over one another until the words echoed like a chorus. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman." The sound hit me harder than any insult ever had. As the echoes of applause faded into murmurs, I lowered myself back into a chair near the side of the gym. Lily stayed close still, clutching my arm, as though afraid I might disappear again. I gave her hand a reassuring pat, though my eyes drifted forward toward Gregory and Monica. It was impossible not to notice the shift. The front row, once the picture of proud family unity, now looked like a stage under siege. Parents and teachers angled their heads, whispering to one another. Some shook their heads outright. Others stared openly at Gregory and Monica, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and disgust. They pushed him away. "After all he's done," a woman muttered, just loud enough for her row to hear. The words carried, bouncing from ear to ear, until they became the new hum of the room. Monica sat rigid, her face crimson. Her eyes locked on her lap as if the wood grain of the floor could swallow her whole. Gregory dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, the fabric already damp with sweat. He looked less like the confident man I once raised, and more like a boy caught lying in church. Dr. Brooks hadn't sat down yet. He lingered at the podium, watching, perhaps sensing that something larger was unfolding. The ceremony had technically ended, but no one was leaving. The air was thick with a need for resolution, for truth. From the back row, I heard a familiar voice cut through the whispers. That man carried this town on his back for years. I turned, my heart jolting. It was Frank Dawson, broad-shouldered, even in old age, his postal uniform long retired, but his presence still commanding. We had walked countless routes together, shoulder to shoulder through rain and snow. Now he stood with a cane of his own, his voice strong despite the years. I remember when Harold worked double shifts to keep the mail running during the blizzard of '82. Frank said, his words rolling out clear as day. He never complained. He never asked for recognition. He just showed up for this town, for its people. And this is how his own family treats him. A wave of murmurs spread again, louder this time, tinged with outrage. Heads swiveled toward Gregory and Monica. Gregory opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His jaw moved, his throat worked, but the words died before they could be spoken. Monica gripped his sleeve, whispering something sharp, but it only made the silence heavier. The crowd wasn't angry at me anymore. They weren't pitying me either. Their eyes had shifted, locking on the two people who had humiliated me just hours before. And in that silence, in that collective judgment, there was a kind of justice I hadn't dared to hope for. I sat a little straighter, Lily still by my side. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like an afterthought. The town had seen me, and more importantly, it had seen them. The whispers no longer hid in the corners. They rose, overlapping, gathering strength until they filled the gym with a hum of collective judgment. Unbelievable. After all he's given, they ought to be ashamed. The words pressed down like a tide, and for once they weren't aimed at me. Gregory shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar. Beads of sweat clung to his temples. Monica clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She tried to stand, but the weight of 100 stares pinned her back down. I sat quietly, letting the moment unfold. For years I had swallowed my hurt in silence, convincing myself that endurance was dignity. But here in this gym full of neighbors and friends, I saw another kind of dignity, one that came from truth laid bare, from wrongs seen for what they were. Frank Dawson stepped closer to the front, leaning heavy on his cane. I walked with Harold through every storm this town has seen, he declared, his voice echoing. He carried letters, packages, even medicine to folks who couldn't leave their homes. You all remember. And you all know I'm telling the truth. Heads nodded all across the rows. A teacher near the stage wiped her eyes, then called out, "My brother was one of those kids who got the scholarship. He's a doctor now because of Mr. Whitman." Applause broke out again, smaller than before, but fiercer, more personal. I saw Gregory bow his head, his lips trembling. Monica whispered something sharp in his ear, but he shook his head weakly. For the first time, I wondered if the mask of arrogance had cracked too far to mend. The gym doors opened and a rush of evening air slipped in. Families began to file out, but they didn't look away as they passed the front row. Each glance, each shake of the head, each muttered word was a verdict. That's the son doesn't deserve the name. Imagine treating your father that way. It wasn't a courtroom, yet the judgment landed heavier than any gavel could. Lily squeezed my hand. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice soft but steady, "they see it now. Everyone sees." I swallowed, hard, emotion clawing at my chest. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice rough. "They do." For once, the shame didn't belong to me. It sat firmly in the laps of Gregory and Monica, burning hotter than any words I could have spoken. As the crowd thinned and the applause faded, I leaned back against the chair. My cane rested across my knees, steady as a staff. For years I had carried my pain quietly unseen, but tonight the weight had shifted. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. I watched Gregory shift in his seat. He leaned toward Monica, trying to tug at her arm, his voice a strained whisper I could almost hear from across the room. "Let's just go, now." But Monica wouldn't move. Her face was still flushed, her jaw clenched tight. She pulled her arm back, hissing low so only he could hear, though the sharpness of her tone carried faintly even to me. "This isn't fair. He embarrassed us on purpose." The words cut through me, not because they were true, they weren't, but because they showed how far her mind twisted the truth. After all that had been revealed, after the gratitude of students and townsfolk alike, she still couldn't see what everyone else now saw so clearly. Gregory slumped his shoulders, sagging as though the weight of the entire gym pressed down on him. His lips moved again, slower this time, as though each word cost him something. Or maybe we embarrassed ourselves. The look Monica shot him could have burned a hole straight through steel, her nails dug into her purse strap, her knuckles whitening even further. But Gregory didn't take the words back. He just stared ahead, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Meanwhile, the applause rolled on. It wasn't loud now, it didn't need to be. It was steady, relentless, echoing in a way that made the silence around Gregory and Monica unbearable. Parents walked past, nodding toward me, then cutting their eyes toward the front row with obvious disapproval. Teachers leaned together, murmuring. Students clapped until their hands must have stung. Every gesture said the same thing: the truth had landed, and no one was rushing to shield Gregory and Monica from it. I sat with Lily beside me, her small hand still warm in mine. She leaned against my shoulder, whispering, "They can't hide anymore." I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. Shame was a seed I realized tiny at first, but once planted under the eyes of a whole community, it grew, whether you wanted it to or not. Gregory leaned closer to Monica again, his voice a rasp I could just catch in the lull between bursts of applause. "We should have treated him better. People wouldn't be looking at us this way if we had." Monica whipped her head toward him, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare put this on me," she hissed. "He planned this. He made us look like fools." Her words stung in their stubbornness, but the crowd's reaction told the true story. A man passing by muttered, "Nobody makes you look like fools. You did that yourselves." His wife tugged at his arm, but he'd already spoken, and the words hung in the air like smoke. Gregory flinched. He bowed his head, rubbing his temples, a broken figure of the man who once carried himself with so much certainty. Maybe we embarrassed ourselves, he repeated softer this time, like an admission to no one but himself. Monica crossed her arms, spine stiff. Her jaw locked so tight I thought her teeth might crack. Yet even she couldn't drown out the truth swelling around us. The applause shifted into a chant led by a cluster of former students near the back. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," they called, their voices strong, pulling the rest of the crowd with them. Soon the gym echoed with it, wave after wave of gratitude that washed right over Gregory and Monica's silence. Lily's hand tightened around mine, her eyes wide, reflecting the glow of the moment. "They'll never forget this," she whispered. I nodded slowly. Neither will they. We watched together as Gregory sank deeper into his chair, his hand slipping from Monica's grasp. She sat rigid, but her mask had cracked. I could see the fear darting behind her eyes, the realization that the community she thought she could charm or control now saw her clearly. It struck me then, shame doesn't bloom in private. It grows when the lights are brightest, when the truth is undeniable, when even silence feels louder than words. The gym had mostly emptied, but the echoes of the evening still lingered. I could feel them in the rafters and the polished floor, in the air that smelled faintly of popcorn and sweat. My body was tired, aching in ways I hadn't felt since my working days at the post office, but my spirit was lighter than it had been in years. As I stepped down from the last riser with Lily's hand clasped firmly in mine, people began to approach me, one by one. Parents I'd barely spoken to in years, teachers I only knew by sight, even students who were still in their caps and gowns, they all came forward. A man with gray at his temples gripped my hand hard, his voice thick. "Mr. Whitman, I was one of the first to receive that scholarship. I wouldn't have gotten through college without it. Tonight I just want to say thank you." Before I could respond, a woman wrapped me in a hug, uninvited but sincere. "My daughter's studying nursing because of your fun," she whispered, her tears dampening my jacket. One after another they came. Some with words, some with tears, some with only a handshake that lasted longer than politeness required. And through it all, Lily never let go of me. Her small hand anchored me, steadied me, as though she'd suddenly realized she wasn't just my granddaughter, I was hers too, and she wasn't about to let anyone push me aside again. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Gregory and Monica. They hadn't moved from the front row, though the seats around them were long empty. Gregory's head hung low, his face pale and drawn. Monica sat stiffly, her lips pressed thin, her skin nearly white against the crimson of her dress. When the last parent stepped away, Gregory finally rose. His steps were slow, reluctant but deliberate. He stopped a few feet in front of me, his eyes darting to the floor before they finally met mine. For a moment he looked like the boy I remembered, the one who used to wait for me at the end of my route, baseball glove in hand, begging for a game of catch. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. I was wrong." The words hung heavy in the air, heavier than any applause had been, heavier than the chants of gratitude. I studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching. Part of me had waited years to hear those words, but another part knew that words were easy. It was the actions that carved their truth into the world. "Actions have consequences, son," I said quietly but firmly. My voice didn't shake. Gregory's face tightened and he nodded once, as though the weight of that truth had finally settled onto his shoulders. Monica said nothing. She stood a few feet behind him, her face frozen, her eyes hollow. If Gregory was beginning to crumble under the weight of shame, she was still fighting to pretend the ground wasn't shifting beneath her feet, but the pretense fooled no one anymore. I turned slightly, Lily still clutching my hand. The applause began again, softer this time, but no less powerful, as though the town itself was escorting us out. Together we walked toward the doors of the gym, the setting sun spilling golden light through the glass. It washed over us, painting the floor in long, warm stripes. I tightened my grip on Lily's hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking out alone. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.